Hey class, today I want to discuss Cicero's account of the origin of friendship and dig into some of the philosophical background of that account. So, in Cicero's text, he explores two possible theories of the origin of friendship. The first theory would be that friendship is rooted in sort of utilitarian goals or needs, where I need to have friends in order to help me achieve something. The second view of friendship would have it that that friendship is not rooted in needs or goals, but is something rooted in strength. And I'll talk about what I mean by strength in a minute. Let's start with the first option, that friendship is rooted in needs or goals. The philosophical background to this view is a school of philosophy or a group of philosophers known as the Epicureans. The Epicureans were followers of a philosopher named Epicurus, and they maintained that the most important thing in life was pleasure. And so when you read the text and there are these various dismissive remarks about people who pursue pleasure or who elevate pleasure too highly, those are references to the Epicureans. So how do the Epicureans understand pleasure? Well, for the Epicureans, pleasure was primarily understood as the absence of pain. Right? The argument that the Epicureans made was that any sort of intense physical pleasure will end up being painful if prolonged indefinitely or prolonged for any length of time. So intense physical pleasure can't actually be true pleasure. True pleasure is got to be understood as merely like the absence of pain. But Cicero always took issue with the claim that any kind of pleasure could be the goal of philosophy or of philosophizing. And he takes aim at the relationship between this theory and a theory of friendship in this discussion. How so? Well, on the Epicurean theory, since the goal of one's life is to maximize pleasure and minimize pain, it would follow that friendship is subservient to that goal, and that one would only have friends insofar as they help you achieve the goal of maximizing pleasure and minimizing pain. So all of your friends would be, in sort of Aristotle's parlance, utilitarian friends or utility friends, because they're really only ways for you to achieve that goal of, again, freedom from pain. Now, Cicero thinks that this is an incorrect theory of the origins of friendship for a variety of reasons. Firstly, he thinks that the Epicureans are wrong about the meaning of life, that he thinks that there is much more to life than merely the pursuit of pleasure. But he also thinks it fundamentally misunderstands and misconstrues friendship, or at least the best kind of friendship. Right? A couple pages earlier in the book, friendship is described as sort of an agreement between friends about things human and divine. Right? So friendship is described as, this is in Roman numeral 6:20, Roman numeral 6:20. They say, friendship is nothing else than an accord in all things, human and divine, conjoined with mutual goodwill and affection. And so the phrase human and divine is really important. Divinarum humanarum que. This is a phrase that gets used more than once by Cicero. The other most important moment where Cicero uses this phrase is in his definition of philosophy itself. When Cicero is describing what philosophy is, he says that philosophy is a search for knowledge of things human and divine. Same phrase appears again in his discussion of friendship, which tells us that he's going to see friendship as something fairly elevated, right? It's going to be something very similar to philosophy. And the problem that he has with the Epicureans is that they do not have that elevated view of friendship. Right? Again, for them, friendship is just a means to an end, but it's not an end in itself, or it's not even a major end. It's just a means. So So Cicero is going to argue that, right, friendship cannot be rooted in need, and friendship cannot be understood merely as a means by which one acquires pleasure of whatever sort. So if that's what friendship is not, well, then what is it? Well, Cicero maintains, as I said earlier, that friendship is sort of rooted in strength. And what do I mean by that? I don't mean physical strength, but rather, remember that word that I talked about in class, vis, right? That sort of power or energy. That is what Cicero is going to say friendship is rooted in, but a particular kind of power or energy, and that would be virtue. Like that for Cicero, friendship and virtue are inextricably linked. And in this part of the conversation, the sort of the philosophical sect lurking in the background that he's going to be dealing with is Stoicism, right? The Stoics maintain that the highest good is virtue, that the most important thing in life, really the only thing that matters, is virtue. So the Stoics will take a very extreme position on this, right? They will say literally nothing matters but virtue. And if you are virtuous, you are living the best possible life for a human being, regardless of what other kinds of miseries or misfortunes you might suffer. Therefore, the Stoics devalue friendship by placing such an emphasis on virtue and maintaining that it's the only thing that matters, that friendship itself seems to become worthless. So Cicero is going to try to sort of swim between these two poles and argue that, yes, virtue is important, but also friendship is important. And this is a common theme in Cicero's writings. Probably his fullest philosophical expression is in a book called The Tusculan Disputations. And the Tusculan Disputations ends with Cicero wrestling with this question about the relationship between virtue and other goods. Right? So Cicero is going to say, yes, you have to be virtuous. Yes, virtue is the sine qua non of a good life. And if you're not virtuous, you cannot be said to be living a good life. But against the Stoics, he's not going to want to say that it is the only thing that matters. Cicero thinks that part of living a good life is being virtuous, right? That's essential, but also having friends. And friendship, he's going to maintain in this text, is so closely linked to virtue that it's almost impossible to be virtuous without having friends. And this is because of what we could call the fundamental likability of virtue. And this is a really important point for Cicero. Cicero thinks that virtue, and you can think here of like excellence, like in Aristotle, is in and of itself attractive, and vice is in and of itself repulsive. And he uses examples from Roman history here, but he mentioned certain villains from Roman history like Tarquin. And he says, look, even though these people have been dead for hundreds of years and we don't know them, like we've never set eyes on them, we don't like them. And the reason we don't like them is not because of anything they've done to us, because again, they've been dead for hundreds of years. It's because of their vices. The historical record gives us information about their vices, and because vices are themselves so unlikable, we don't like these people. On the other hand, there might be figures from history that one has never met and that have not benefited you in any particular way. Maybe they lived on the other side of the world or whatever, but because you've heard of their virtues, they are likable, right? And this is, Cicero would say, is because virtue is in and of itself attractive. People are attracted to virtue and repelled by vice. Now, sometimes people resist this claim. They'd be like, well, I don't really think so. I think some people are attracted by vice. And Cicero is aware that there are people that like bad things, and he has a simple response to that. Those are bad people. Yes, vicious people like vicious things. So some people might find vice attractive, but those people he thinks are really not what we should take as our standard. And you might say, well, why is that? Why can't we take that as the standard? Well, the reason is, remember, virtue is excellence, right? The morally virtuous person is excellent. Why would that make the vicious person? That would make the vicious person is crappy. They're a sucky, crappy person. And the way Cicero would understand this is that the vicious person is really not good at life, right? Someone who's vicious they're not living the best possible life for a human being. They're not even on the way to living the best possible life for a human being. They're basically not good at life. So, once we've identified somebody as vicious, why would we trust their judgment on anything? Or why would we take their opinions about what's attractive and what's unattractive as normative? Cicero can acknowledge that not everybody is attracted by the same things, but he would say part of the reason why is because some people are not properly functioning while others are, right? So that, there might be someone who enjoys going to like dark corners of the internet and watching videos of, kittens being tortured. That's because they're messed up, right? We don't have to take that as normative and say, oh, well, there must be something virtuous about that. No, the person's messed up. And their opinions about what's attractive and what they want to spend their time thinking or doing, we don't have to take into account. On the other hand, most people would find that, videos of kittens being tortured repulsive. When Cicero makes the claim about sort of the inherent likability of virtue, he can accommodate the counter-argument that, some people don't like virtuous things, right? And he'll be able to accommodate that by saying those people are messed up. Now, the relationship between virtue and friendship follows fairly readily, that since virtue is inherently likable, if someone is exercising virtue and showing forth virtue, then they would themselves become likable and, attract friends. So, just as an example of how this works, I think, since I'm wearing the shirt, right, during the last World Cup, the Croatian team, Croatia's a little country that, doesn't have, it's not well known, but the Croatian team, made it all the way to the finals till they were beat by France, unfortunately. But they became sort of an increasingly popular team as the tournament went on. Why did Croatia become increasingly popular, and why did more and more people begin to sort of follow Croatia? Well, basically because they played really good soccer, right? They played soccer excellently, and so people liked that. And so the likability of the Croatian team was because of the excellence with which they played soccer, right? And you could say the same about any team. Like, even though I was rooting for Croatia, I have to admit that, there are players on the French team, like Mbappe, that I really like, even though I've never met him or anything, but he was just so amazing that I could not help but be like, wow, that guy's awesome, right? And he wasn't displaying moral virtue, and none of the players were just really displaying moral virtue in the tournament, but they were displaying sort of athletic virtue, and that itself was somewhat likable. So, for Cicero, the friendship is not rooted in weakness or need or utilitarian value, but it's rooted in virtue. And this is because virtue is inherently likable. In contrast to the Stoics, who will maintain that the virtuous person needs nothing but virtue to be happy, Cicero will maintain that virtue and friendship are so intertwined that the virtuous person requires friends to be happy. That friendship is one of those goods that must be present to live the best possible life for a human being. With that, I'll leave it till I see you in class again.